Hey everybody, this is Robert with RC Archery and you're watching Tuesday's Tip of the Week number 72. In today's video, we're going to be starting our shot execution series. We're going to be going over all of how to set up releases, how to use them, how to build and develop our shot execution, what that looks like, and then how to help you with growing, adjusting, and adapting as your skill set evolves as well. Today's video, we're specifically going to start out by talking about how to find our overall total shot window, and then also what the ideal time frame within that looks like for our shot to go off. And then finally, we're going to be going over releases, how to set up and how to adjust them in order to make that ideal shot window happen more often. All right, in our first segment here, we're going to talk about our total shot window. What that means, ways to be more efficient in that realm, and then also give you a look down range through my scope and let you see kind of what that looks like in a practical aspect. So to start out, let's just go over what this is. So essentially our total shot window is the time from when we start drawing the bow back to the time where our body is breaking down, whether that's running out of oxygen, or our muscles just starting to fail us and we're not holding as steady and we're breaking down and we need to let down. Now it's important to find this for a couple reasons, and it's important to be able to recognize and diagnose and see what this is. And the main one is because we need to know that final moment when we have to let down on our shot. If you shoot long enough, you're going to have shots and days where the timing of it just takes too long. Maybe we're nervous because it's a competition. Maybe we're just stiff and we're a little bit off that day. Who knows what it is. Maybe we're struggling with our releases and our execution with how it feels in our hand. So we need to know, one, when we have to let down so that we can identify that and then start working and focusing on forcing us to let down. And then the second thing is we need to understand how to become more efficient to be able to make that window work for us as well as possible. And the main thing that I mean by that is we need to have a very good drawing motion and be able to get on target more efficiently. So when we are looking at grabbing our bows and working through this, the main thing that we're looking at here is we're wanting to find the motion that we can use drawing back and getting on target that allows us to get our pin in the center of the target as fast as possible. So we don't want to have any kind of weird exaggerated movements where we're way out here or way low, or we're coming up, or we're real far left, right, or anything like that. That was the main concept when we were looking at our form series, and why I started it out by building a natural point of aim left and right, and then finishing it with building that natural point of aim up and down. Because of doing that, we are pretty close to dead center of target already just to begin with. But our drawing motion, what we're looking at and what we're focusing on downrange, is going to help finalize that in the end. So when we are drawing back on target, what we're wanting to do is have that pin just a little above the center of the target in that spot and what we're aiming at. And for purposes of this video, let's talk about perfect scenarios in flat ground, targets level, around the shoulder, face height, something like that. That'll give you an idea of a starting point here and what we're wanting to look at. Now, if you have a target that's a little lower than that or higher than that, or if you're shooting up and downhill, obviously that setup changes, and that's something that we have to adapt and change and bend at the waist and kind of adjust. One thing that I heard that always kind of resonated with me was George Riles talking about how we keep the angle of our shoulders with the angle of whatever that height is, whether it's up or down. So if we're shooting at a target that's up in the air, our starting position will be here to draw so that we can maintain getting just above the spot in the draw and then settling down with our pin in the middle. If it's downhill, the opposite, it's adjusting this angle of shoulders. But for now, let's just talk about getting on target in a level, just normal playing field. And the main thing, like I said, is we want to draw back with the pin just above the target in that natural good drawing motion that we have. And then as we settle down and get into anchor, we should be able to get on target and be with that pin in the middle. Now, one thing that I will say that will make this easier for you is find that pin outside of your peep sight as you're drawing and look at that pin the entire time, or your dot or whatever you're using as your aiming reticle. And then as you center that up and anchor, your peep sight will just come over in front of your face. You shouldn't have to move the head around or do anything kind of crazy, and you should be able to just be there in the center of the target. So it will look a little bit like this. That's going to allow us to shave off a ton of time on the beginning of our shot window. Now, what I do as far as breathing, I have a lot of people that ask me this. Sometimes it matters. You're going to find your own kind of flow and rhythm there. But what I will do and what I recommend to people if they're going to ask me, where to start and try to find what works best for them is I take a deep breath and then I draw the bow back while letting that breath out. And then at that point, as I'm anchoring and I'm building tension up into my shot and kind of working into setting up an anchor, I will breathe back in. I don't take as deep of a breath at that point as I did to begin with, but I do breathe in, fill my lungs, kind of get my chest to come out a little bit, and that helps me settle in at anchor and be a little bit more firm. It also gives me some extra oxygen to be able to really start my shot execution and kind of working through that, not running out of breath, that kind of thing. Now that's the first part of this. The second part of this is let's look down my scope and let's see what this looks like on target. Now what we're doing here is we are going to draw back, we're going to get on target, and then we're just going to start counting. I typically tell people that it's easiest to just draw back and anchor and then start counting through our shot window. We're really just studying our float here, and we're kind of feeling our bodies and studying that float and seeing when the overall moment of that breakdown happens, and then when it does, we'll let down. Take a few breaths, 20, 30 seconds, something like that, kind of rest, let the lactic acid flow out of your muscles again, restart this and do it again. Do this a few times to see if you're kind of consistently maintaining that same shot window timing, but also do this so that you can recognize when it starts to break down and start training your brain to let down on the shot. That's going to be super important later on. But that's what I'm doing when I'm looking at our total shot window and how all of that kind of works together. One little bonus tip that I will give you too is be soft in your bow hand. Don't have a really rock hard, stiff bow hand. What you'll see when you get to anchor, especially if you draw back really fast and hard and bang into the back wall or bang into the stops on the bow, combining those two things when you get on target, you'll see the bow want to wiggle around and do a lot of crazy stuff like that. It takes you a lot longer to settle it down and get it on target, and that just adds extra time to your shot window. It could be even 1 or 2, 3 seconds, and that's really hurting you overall. All right, now that we know our total shot window, let's break that down and let's find our ideal shot timing for the best chance of being able to have our shot release in the middle. Now, what I have found with myself and a lot of other archers that I work with is our bodies naturally have a timing system within it where we will see a window where our pin is very steady and where it's very centered in the middle of the target. So keep this in mind. Everybody's float pattern and what you're seeing is relative to the archer. It changes day to day. It can change from one moment to the next depending on what's going on, and it's going to change while you're on your evolution and your path of working through being more steady, adjustments on the bow, your form, weight on stabilizer, shot execution method, all that kind of stuff. So what we're doing here is in relative terms for you. And the best thing that I will say is don't think that your pin has to be completely still in the middle of the target. It's going to move around as our heart beats, our body jumps and it moves. We have a natural movement within our limbs and our bodies. Everything's not locked in. You're going to have movement. Now, when we look through the scope on my video here and you're seeing, a first person view of what I see when I'm looking at a target, we're actually going to see where in my overall shot timing, I actually have 2 separate windows of ideal execution time frame. I have one at the first of my shot, and then I have a break of a second or so, and then I have one at the end. And it's generally like in that 3 to 5 second range, somewhere in there, and then again in like that 6 to 8, 7 to 8 second range window as well. So for me, when I'm really consistent and I'm really calm and under pressure, this adjusts and this changes. So if I'm just practicing at home, my shot timing and everything is different than when I'm at a tournament or when I'm under pressure for a certain shot to, be a good one or whatever it is. So there's different thoughts about this that I've had in the past, and there's different ways that I've adjusted this. I have experimented with, when I'm at home in practice, allowing my release to go off in that first window, that 3 to 5 second range window from when I get to anchor and get settled in. Now, when I get to a tournament, it's more like that 7 to 8 range, and that works really well for me. The other thing that I've found that I do now is I really like to focus on that front window, but not rushing to get there. I'm just trying to adjust there. So when I'm starting my shot execution, I anchor, I build my tension up in my shot, which is something that we'll talk about in later videos here in this shot execution series. But when I'm having a good day and I'm really steady on target, that beginning window, that front window, is attainable whether I'm at home at practice or at a tournament. But if I have a shot that is taking longer to fire, I know that I have that secondary window where I will kind of settle back in and it will be better. Now, if I go past that, I'm nearing the end of my total shot window and I'm gonna let down. I'm gonna start over, ideally. Doesn't always happen, but that's the idea, right? So while we're doing this, we're not shooting a shot, we're not working through our shot execution, we're literally just holding on target and we're studying our float and we're looking at what we see here and trying to develop when we have those windows. You may just have one, it may be small, it may be larger than mine, everybody's a little bit different, but just check that to see what you have, and that's the beginning of trying to kind of work through this. Now the other thing with this is, when we are just allowing ourselves to float on target when we're actually shooting our shot from one to the next, and we're not forcing a certain timing of that shot to kind of go off within, let's say that, with my ideal shot window, 3 to 5 seconds, I'm not trying to punch or trigger or make my shot happen in that 3 to 5 second window range. I just know that if I'm doing my part on my setup and I'm adjusting my releases and working through them consistently, that I will have a better chance of it firing in that window because I set it up for that. So while we're doing this and while we kind of move on from here and start executing our shots and actually working through the release, we don't want to just punch or intentionally try to time it. What we want to do is allow it to happen naturally. And what that's doing for us is, our body can only do so many things at once. We can only focus really on one area at a time. So if I'm focusing on working through and executing a shot, I can't focus on holding steadier on target. If I'm focusing on holding steadier on target, it's harder for me to actually execute and work that shot. So what I have done and what I recommend everybody to do is to allow your subconscious to take over for your aiming or for your shot execution. And everybody's a little bit different. I've done a video in the past, are you an aimer or are you an executor, and gave my definitions on that and kind of what that looks like. But for me, I want my aiming to be subconsciously taken care of. Whatever patterns that I have on target and what I'm seeing in my float are consistent from day to day, because that's my patterns. And your patterns will be different, but yours will be consistent from day to day. If you allow your brain to start reading those patterns and adapting to them and getting used to them over time, your subconscious will take over, and then it will start aligning everything for you. And the actual moment that shot breaks and what you're seeing on target will all start to mesh and kind of go together for you. Now, I've done extensive videos on this in the past. They're here on my YouTube channel. I have a complete video over this that I sell. All kinds of stuff that I've talked about this in a lot of videos, so I won't go too in depth here, but allow yourself to either let your subconscious watch that aiming and allow it to happen, or allow your subconscious to kind of work through your shot execution, allow it to happen. But just let it all mesh and meld together. My best days shooting are not when I'm trying to force a shot. My best days shooting are when I can just relax and let myself aim and just tell myself, just shoot your shot, and just, whatever my mantra is that day, and it works for me and it all kind of lines up together. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about today is adjusting our release now to be able to match that ideal shot execution window. So there is a couple things that we need to look at whenever we're doing this. You can find some false negatives on this and you can chase your tail and you can spend way too long doing that. So I'm going to go over that today, and I'm going to go over my process when doing this. Now, if you're using an index release or a hinge release or a thumb release or even a resistance release, the main thing that I will say is within all of those releases, we need to be able to set up two things: a positive balance point and an increase in setup pressure on however we're using them. And that probably confuses you, but let me explain. Whenever we're using a hinge release, the hinge release is going to work on rotation. And a lot of people use these now, so I'm going to go over this first. But with this hinge release, it takes rotation in order to make it fire. So when I'm talking about allowing us to have a positive input into that release, I'm meaning that naturally this release is going to rock a certain amount on its own based off your finger pressures. And then once it gets to that balance point, you're going to have to increase the pressure to make it fire. We don't want to have to increase those pressures a ton in order to make a release fire, because it's inducing too much movement, too much muscle, and it will change that really good float that we found up until this point. So we want to avoid that. We want to be able to work with this release. Now, we don't need the release to be set so hot that we can't put any pressure on these outer fingers, however many that is. This is a 2-finger release, but if you have a 3 or a 4, we want to engage those. So while we're still holding tension on our index, when we get to anchor, we want to be able to increase a little bit of tension on these outer fingers to just get that balance and get that weight transfer started. And then depending on how you're executing your release at that point, then it just is fine-tuning what we're doing with it. And in our members only video that we're talking this week, I'm actually going to go over that with you on different styles of shot execution and what that looks like with the hinge and with the thumb button. And I'm also going to be going over how to have some focal points as far as what we're thinking of while we're executing in order to create a natural movement and to allow us to have a little bit easier shot execution. But I've got a couple different releases set up here today. I have 2 thumb buttons and I have 2 hinge releases. And the reason I have this is they're set up differently. These releases in the front that I use currently, one is a fulcrum flex, that's the release that you see that's a hinge, and then the goat, the true ball goat, that's the one that I'm using set up as a thumb button. Those are set up to be a little faster on the hinge speed and a little lighter on the thumb trigger than this true ball HT that I've made into a 2-finger, or the Carter Just Cuz that I have set up there. And this is just kind of an overall, just an evolution of the way that I've shot, what I'm doing over time and the way that I'm working through release, and this is what's working for me. But I wanted to kind of go over this really quickly with you. When I am shooting with this release here, there is a lot of travel in it that I have before this shot's gonna fire. You can see that it's rotating and rocking and it's moving an awful lot before that shot goes off. For me, when I'm looking at that, that is a very safe way to set up that hinge, and a lot of people have it set up that way to begin with. But what you'll probably notice is it's really hard to be able to execute that shot without increasing or adding unnecessary pressure to that release to allow it to fire. And it's also hard to get into that shot window that we talked about. So that's kind of where we come into with this release here. This is the fulcrum flex that I use, set up with a click. The way you use this release with a click is that when we anchor this, the majority of the pressure that I have drawing the bow back is on my index and a little bit on the thumb here, and I get into anchor with very minimal pressure on my middle finger. When I am anchoring in and I'm getting those pressures built up that we'll talk about later on, that's when I'm looking for it to go through and click. And then that's my starting point. That's not happening during my shot. That is happening right now. And then from here, it is very little movement that I need in order to make this release fire. So the way that I would recommend doing this and setting this up to start with so that it's safer for you is set up a hinge slower to begin with, and then start speeding it up until you get into that shot window. Now, there is what I was talking about before with that false negative. If we are having a release that we feel like is taking too long to fire, and we start increasing the speed of that hinge, so we're needing less movement in order to rotate it and fire it. A lot of the times what we're doing when this is happening, and when we just get to a point to where it feels like we've made it faster and faster and faster and it's still not firing and the shot is taking forever and we're trying to match it to that window and it just won't happen, is we are not engaging these outer fingers enough when we are in that preload stage, when we're starting out. That's a lot of the reason why I like to have this click, is because I know that I've preloaded my outer fingers to a consistent starting position from one shot to the next. But if you aren't doing that, you'll pull forever and ever and ever, and all you're doing is pulling with this index finger, and it's never gonna fire no matter how hard you pull that release. This is at the click, this is just, it's not gonna go anywhere. But if you add this outer pressure into that release, now at this point, I don't have to pull very hard at all, and that release is gonna fire no problem. So make sure that on a hinge release especially, that you are adding that little bit of preload to that outer part of the release. Same thing with shooting a thumb release. We actually wanna add a preloaded amount of pressure into this button whenever we're getting to anchor. I won't go over specifics on where to put your thumb or what you're doing or how you're doing all of this. I've got a video that I've made in the past. I'll link it here. That way you can go back and look at that on different ways to shoot a thumb button. But it's the same thing. If we get into anchor and we're lightening that trigger and we get it too light, we're gonna be afraid to put our thumb on it. And then at that point, when we go to execute, there's no pressure there. Nothing ever increases on it, and we just start pulling for no reason because there's just nothing there. Same thing with the pressure on the outer fingers. We still want to have pressure on the outer fingers with this release. That actually works together. The way that our hand works is, as that thumb pressure increases, the outer fingers do too, and kind of opposite of that. You can see it kind of moves around, both of them. Our hands are a little bit connected in that realm. So when I'm getting to anchor, I'm making sure that I can get a decent amount of pressure where my thumb is pressing into that button before I start my shot execution. Same thing with this one. This is actually set up lighter than the Just Cuz that I have here. Makes it, for me, it makes it a lot easier to be able to execute with, but it's not a hair trigger and it's not so light that my thumb touching the trigger, it's just gonna fire and go off. I have enough confidence to where I know that I can put my thumb into that trigger and be able to shoot it. With the resistance release, you wanna be able to come off that safety and not have the shot just fire and not have you feel like you need to relax or take some pressure off the back wall, because then you're just kind of working against yourself. And the same thing with an index and a trigger, it's just like our thumb releases. So whenever we're working through timing our shot and getting it into that ideal shot window with the speed of a hinge or the weight of a trigger, those are some areas to look at. And then we just adapt them and adjust them to where our shot is just happening. We're not forcing it to happen, but it's happening within that ideal shot window where we're gonna be in the middle as often as possible. Now, I have a lot of people ask me, so really quick before the video is over, this is a Morin shot trainer. I bought it off of Lancaster Archery's website. I'm actually gonna have to buy a new one because literally I pulled this out and started using those releases before the video and it broke. So this one's really old. I've had this for probably, man, I don't know, probably close to 10 years. So you can go on there, you can go on the website, and you can search Morin, M-O-R-I-N, shot trainer, and they'll pop right up. These elastic bands here allow for different holding weights. So you'll see them in like 20, 25, 15, stuff like that. So keep that in mind when you're working at home, when you're getting used to how much tension you can put into a thumb button or how much tension you can put into a hinge, or you're adjusting a brand new one. This is a super simple tool to use. It's very safe, where you don't have to worry about punching yourself in the face with a hinge release or having a misfire with your bow and sending an arrow off somewhere in an unsafe manner. So keep that in mind, guys. Want to tune into the members video? There's a link down in the description below that'll have the different stages that you can get, where it's videos only or videos and access to direct coaching with me. Both of those have different prices, and you can check that out. If you want to become a member of this channel, you will see an extra video each week that's just for you, that goes more in depth or shows more information closer to what I have in my videos that I sell or my coaching. So thank you for watching this video. Hopefully this will help you, and we'll start blending this together in the shot execution series. By the end of it, it'll all come together and make a lot more sense for you and help you a lot more with being steady through shot execution as much as you are with just holding on target. Thanks again, guys. I'll see you soon.